everybody, this is John Bohlinger with Premier Guitar. We are in Nashville, Tennessee at Gruhn's. And I'm with Evo and this amazing amplifier. This is, well, you know what? Evo, you should tell us about this amp because you know better than, way better than me. So Evo, of course, is an amp builder, and you've all seen his work on our rig rundowns. In fact, I've seen particularly your reverb tank everywhere. The gear you didn't want to build, you now are building for everybody. But your amps as well, I've seen those all over the place. So you know more about amps than anybody I know. So take it away.
This is a very, very early production Marshall JTM45. This one came from the first, you can't even call it a batch because it was pre-production. In 1963, Jim Marshall, he had a music shop. He had a repairman named Ken Brand that did all their electronics work, and they got to talking at one point. A lot of their big cats that would come in and shop there, they would come back from the States, and everybody knew like the best amp you could get at that point was like a Fender Bassman or a Tweed Twin.
Right.
And impossible to procure in England at the time.
Yeah, it was weird back then. You couldn't like seeing a Strat or a proper Les Paul was like a rarity.
Oh yeah, everything over there. And I mean, it's not to get too far down that hole, but it is still like it's post-war England.
Right. Yeah.
Stuff is just hard to get.
Right.
Stuff from the States. You hear all these stories about late 50s, early 60s, where kids would have to order records from the States, and they'd wait for them to show up, and then they'd finally get this, this Buddy Holly record or whatever. It was, and
not the global economy.
Not
of
at
today.
all. Yeah, no Amazon Prime or anything back then. But yeah, at the time, and maybe still to this day, like the Fender, the Tweed Bassman and the Tweed Twin, that was kind of the highest point of development in guitar amp world at that point. And so they got to talking. Ken Brand at one point said, well, rather than trying to dig these up, maybe we could just build our own amps here. And Jim thought that was a good idea, and they actually I always thought this was kind of funny because you don't hear much about this part, but there was Ken was a good repairman, but he wasn't an engineer. He didn't know, he thought he was kind of out of his league there. And they found this kid who was 18 years old, that worked at EMI at the time, this little engineer kid named Dudley Craven. And so this 18-year-old kid started building prototypes, and he was actually the one that designed these.
Really?
18-year-old kid.
Wow,
Ain't that
man.
something? Now, the qualifier, with a lot of help from Leo Fender, because the JTM45s, the schematic at least it's virtually identical to a Fender Bassman.
Really?
Yeah.
I've always heard that.
Yeah. Yeah, the Tweed Bassman circuit, and to their credit, like, well, okay, what's the best amp? That's the best amp. Let's start with that.
Huh.
Yeah. But yeah, even if you look at these, even the control panel layout and everything is identical to a Tweed Bassman. Well, why don't they sound just like a Tweed Bassman? Well, that's another path to go down. The schematic was the same, but obviously they couldn't get the same parts. They couldn't get the same transformers, the same tubes, all of that. They had to work with whatever they had on the shelf,
right,
or whatever they could get locally. And you can tell, especially in this the really early models, they're all a little like they all had different knobs. Right. You know, there were a few different kinds of knobs they would use. You know, different some different transformers, capacitors, all of that stuff. They were kind of using whatever they had on hand.
Right.
Once, you know, a year or two down the road, once they ramped up, you know, they were buying parts in bulk and having things made and stuff like that. But at this point, this was Ken Brand building these by hand at the rate of 1 or 2 a week in the back of Jim's little music shop there.
Wow.
So for that level of sophistication in production, it's really remarkable that right out of the gate, like they came out with a really great amp. The initial batch, they call these the offset JTM45s, because as you can see that the chassis is off to one side, and the reason they thought to do that was because the transformers, you know, the big heavy transformers on this side of the chassis, if you centered the chassis, that end would be heavy. And they thought,
right.
Well, why don't we just move the chassis over here so that the handle is kind of right over the heaviest part, and it'll, you know.
Really? So
well balanced.
Yeah.
Okay. But that initial run of JTM45s in this offset configuration were one at a time, built in the back of Jim Marshall's shop by Ken Brand, and no serial numbers on that initial batch, and there aren't any solid figures on how many that would be. Probably less than 60. I've read that the initial batch of orders that they took on them was around 23 amps.
Wow.
And I'm pretty confident in saying this one is from that initial batch of 23.
Wow.
So with no serial number, it's hard to pinpoint exactly, but you can compare it to some of the other surviving specimens and say, well, okay, well, it's got the same knobs as this one and this one, so you can kind of narrow it in. But this one is almost certainly from that initial batch of, you know, maybe 23 orders that they received for them when they hung the shingle out.
Okay, so you think about that, 23 amps, and then just the sheer attrition rate of what, 50, 60 years, 60, 61 years?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, how many are?
Well, and John, as a guy who has been in some Marshalls.
Yeah, you are a Marshall.
They're all messed up, man.
Yeah,
especially
right.
the old ones. Yeah. It's laughable sometimes. Over the years, you open up because these weren't student amps.
Yeah.
You know, the guys that bought these were cats.
Yeah.
They were working, you know, and you didn't have flight cases back then. All this stuff got thrown in the back of, you know, someone's van or whatever, and they were working all the time. So it's pretty rare. I mean, the condition that this one is in is remarkable by any standards, but for an amp that was, you know, this was the top of the mountain. This was as good as you could buy, you know, in England in the late 60s, early 60s in this case. But so this wasn't like the Weekend Warrior amp.
Yeah.
You know, this was these guys were out working them, cranking them, and beating the shit out of them, and so they all took their lumps.
Oh, I'm sure.
You know? And it's really rare to see any old Marshall that hasn't, you know, everything's been changed. Output transformer's been blown because they got used.
Yeah.
They got cranked up and taken around the world.
And running on 220.
Well, yeah, running on 220, and this one only runs on 220.
Yeah.
Because they weren't selling them anywhere but, out the front door of Jim Marshall's music store.
Right, which makes you wonder, God, what kind of crazy journey led this thing here, right?
I love that about old amps.
Yeah.
I always wonder, like, whose was this?
Yeah.
Because this wasn't, it wasn't the kid that signed up for some guitar lessons and needed an amp,
Yeah.
And a lot of the guys that the demand that Jim Marshall saw for these was, he had Pete Townsend and Clapton and all these guys that would pop through now and then. So that's who he's thinking he's going to sell some amps to.
Right. Yeah, you think about that demographic.
Yeah.
Beck, Clapton, Page.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So so these were definitely, these were professional amps.
Wow.
Sold to professional guys. So yeah, it's anyone's guess who walked out the door with this one the first time.
Right. Okay, so you've taken apart a lot of JCMs, I'm sure. How close is this to anything you can buy, anything that they've sold of late? Like what is the closest model that
well, Marshall did, they did a reissue of this specific amp.
Oh, really?
A while back. Yeah, they did. In fact, if I recall, they did the same. The 212s, and these cabs are not original to this head, but they're period. They're old ones.
Yeah.
But yeah, they did a limited version of this a few years back.
Huh.
But it's just like, they copied a Fender Bassman.
Right.
Does it sound like a Fender Bassman? It doesn't sound like a Fender Bassman.
Right.
In fact, that circuit, they used that same Bassman circuit. It was quite a few years before there were really significant changes to it.
Yeah.
But right out of the gate, it didn't sound like a Bassman because you're sourcing different parts.
Right.
And also,
EL84 is in this?
no. In fact, this is kind of fun about this particular amp. So the Bassmans, the tweed Bassmans of the period, they 6L6s, 5881s, whatever. That was the power tube that came in those. Hard to find in England.
Right.
Okay. But trying to remain true to their objective.
Yeah.
The very earliest JTM45s, they dug up, in England, they dug up 6L6s.
Wow.
And that's what they shipped with initially.
Huh. Wow, that's interesting.
The JTM45, now in hindsight, it's associated with the big bottle KT66s, which are amazing. Okay. But initially, those were really expensive, and they were more available in England, but they were trying to do the Bassman thing with these. So the very first ones, they shipped with 6L6s.
Huh.
And the fun part, this is how you can tell if you've got one of the earliest ones. This cabinet, chassis ends there, it's not tall enough for KT66s in there.
Oh, really?
So the very earliest ones, the cabinet was slightly shorter. Later, I guess by 64, when they started shipping, I say shipping, they weren't shipping these. They were handing them to the guy over the counter, and he walked out the door with it.
Yeah.
This was not a sophisticated operation. But once they switched to the KT66s, the cabinet got about an inch taller. Wow. Because they needed a little more room to fit that big bottle in there.
So in the beginning, the bigger tubes weren't even on the radar. They were just going for that Bassman.
Well, they don't fit.
Yeah.
They physically don't fit in here.
Yeah. That's cool.
That's how you know you got a really, really early one. But yeah, they were, you know, the Bassman and Tweed Twin, and we won't go off on a tangent here, but the Tweed Bassman, Tweed Twin, very similar circuits.
Sure.
Very, very similar circuits. In fact, the low-powered Tweed Twins it's the same circuit as the Bassmans of the same period, different output transformers. Otherwise, they're identical.
Huh.
So, yeah, that's what they were going for that. The other thing, tube-wise, that they encountered, the Bassmans and Twins used 12AY7s in the preamp section, which it's a twin triode, slightly lower gain than a 12AX7. That was standard equipment in the Tweed Fender amps. Nobody in England made a 12AY7. Okay, you could get a ECC83, which was the British version of a 12AX7. So that's what they used. You wonder why Marshalls, you know, they've definitely got a lot more snot and gain than, you know, a Tweed Fender amp. Well,
yeah.
Right there, that's most of it.
Wow.
Is the basically a 12AX7 instead of a 12AY7.
Huh.
In fact, you want to take an old Tweed Bassman and make it sound a lot like this. Just swap those preamp tubes out.
Oh, good tip.
It's pretty gnarly.
Yeah.
Maybe too gnarly,
Yeah.
but it's pretty gnarly. But yeah, that was, you know, that just out of necessity, because they didn't have a good source over there for 12AY7. So.
Wow.
But yeah, they did as the story, I guess, is they did. It was either 6 or 8 prototypes. Either the 6th or 8th one was the one that they all agreed, like, yeah, this is the one.
That's the one.
And that one is still Jim Marshall hung on to that one, and it's I think it still lives in the museum over there.
Sure.
But yeah, after those initial prototypes, they started building them in the back of the store.
And this is the production.
This is the back of the store amp.
Well, let's hear this thing a little bit. Okay, cross front, presence, bass, middle, treble, volume channel 1, volume channel 2. Yeah. And we got them, they're tied together. So, and I'm playing, this is actually a 1959 ES335 that belonged to Dan Auerbach. So,
oh, is that his?
Yeah, it's a black key. Yeah. So it's intimidating playing gear like this, you know? Oh, and on the ground, I've got a Keeley delay just in case. Right now, I've got the mids up there quite a bit. I want to bring that treble up a little bit more. Get a little angrier.
Bet you can.
curious if we keep going. It is loud, right?
It's pretty loud.
It is pretty loud.
They call it a JTM45.
How many watts do you think this is
Well,
actually?
it's supposed to be 45 watts.
Yeah.
Not really.
Yeah.
30 some.
Really?
30 some.
Wow.
But it's a strong 30 some.
Yeah. Well, like AC30 is a really loud 30 amp.
Yeah.
30 watt. But God, man, that seems loud because we're not even. Okay, now we're half and half. So let's see what that does. Yeah, it's like punishingly loud. I feel bad putting you through this. Man.
Yeah, dude.
Jeez. A lot of amp.
A lot of amp. But this is an exceedingly this is Sasquatch.
Yeah, right.
This is a chupacabra, just very rarely seen in captivity.
Yeah.
You just don't come across these ever. You see pictures of them, but to have one actually come out of the woods and land here at Gruhn's,
Yeah.
it's and this one is, I mean, it's the cleanest one I've ever laid hands on.
Right. Shockingly clean.
Shockingly clean. Yeah, it's just it's a piece of history, literally a piece of history. John, you see this thing?
Yes.
This is fun. They call these badges, they call them a coffin badge because they needed a logo, a badge or something to, and so apparently there was a casket company up the street, and so they got this casket company to make up some badges for them. And if you look at that thing, I mean, you see them in pictures
Yeah.
or whatever, but seriously, you look at it in person,
Yeah.
it's like, that looks like
I
it
get
was
it.
nailed to a casket.
How beautifully macabre.
Here lies Ebo. Like,
Yeah.
Marshall.
Yeah. God.
That looks like it came right off of a coffin.
Okay, that is really a hip detail.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
I'll say this about Jim Marshall and Ken Brand and Young Dudley. A lot of times, like even Leo Fender's earliest amps, they're cool, but they weren't great.
Yeah.
A lot of times, the earliest ones aren't necessarily the best ones. Takes you a little while to kind of
Sure.
dial stuff in, and the earliest amps I built, they're okay. They're not as good as the ones I'm building now. But they had the wisdom and foresight to kind of start with a known platform.
Right.
That
A target, at least.
Yeah. And they really like the learning curve, on these. I mean, a couple years after this, you're getting into the plexis and stuff like that. And I mean, they're some of the greatest amps ever built.
Sure.
They really hit it out of the park.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. So it's really a real treat to spend some time with a genuine artifact here.
Right, man. It is kind of like archaeology,
Yeah.
Taking it up, brushing it off.
Yeah, it is.
Seeing how they did it. Yeah.
It is. Well, and especially for an amp dork
Yeah.
to actually get inside
Right.
and see what all was going on in there. And yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. So yeah, so this It's here. It's at Gruhn's.
Yeah.
For now.
Yeah, right, for now. And you can
I'm going to talk to my wife when I get home about maybe no, I'm not going to buy it.
Yeah.
Not going to buy it.
Yeah. You don't want to, you talk to your wife, next thing you know, you're talking to a lawyer. You don't want to do
I'm not
that,
going to
man.
buy it.
Yeah.
But it's pretty cool.
Yeah, pretty amazing.
It's pretty cool. And honestly, even, swimming around in amp world my whole life, I mean, they are just, it's Sasquatch. It really is.
Well, Ivo, thank you, man. I'm so glad you could join. It's funny, the last time I saw you, we were on a gig together.
Yeah.
And
we were.
And then
we were. That was for T.A. Weber.
That's right.
Up in Kokomo. Love you, bro.
And you only took the gig to get those speakers, and then you never worked with me again. But man, thank you for your expertise on this. I mean, it is so cool to kind of hear the history behind it. What do you say? Okay, we've heard it with these PAF, and by the way, Dan Auerbach, huge fan of your work and huge fan of your guitar. Golly.
Yeah. I love Dan.
Right.
Dan's a great pal and great customer as well.
Yeah, that's great. Now let me plug in this Strat. This is my old 66, I guess. Yeah, so let's hear what it does here this thing.